Hello there, I'm Isabel, and today I'm making yet another Pikmin diorama. So here's the idea. In the Pikmin 4 game trailer, we see Pikmin's carrying an old Game Boy Advance SP, which was the inspiration for this diorama. My siblings and I own many handheld Nintendo consoles growing up. I have a Game Boy Color, but not the SP. No way, it still works. This DS Lite, however, doesn't work. Well, that's pretty obvious because I took it apart, and by I mean I watched my dad disassemble it. And before y'all get offended that we took it apart, don't worry, it didn't power up anymore. My dad tried to fix it, it was fried. So instead of going to the dump, it's gonna be repurposed. So let's take a little moment to remember the countless hours of Nintendo that was played on this console. Okay, so here's the plan. I want to make GLOW Pikmin playing on DS, and I want the whole thing to light up. Since there will be electricity involved, I made this drawing which will be useful to figure out how I'm gonna wire the Pikmins. My dad already had small LED bulbs that I can use to light up the Pikmin. But since the DS screens wouldn't power up, I ordered LED strips to light those up. My dad will also be helping me with the wiring because he knows how to do that. It's gonna take a couple of days for the LEDs I ordered to get here, so I'm gonna start with the Pikmins. I printed a bunch of different size GLOW Pikmin to figure out which one would fit best with the size of the DS. I chose to go with the bigger one so it's easier to sculpt the arms. I'll start by making the basic shapes of the head and body out of foil. I made them just a tad smaller than the reference since the translucent clay needs to be thin enough to let the light through. The thickness of the clay also needs to be uniform so there's no random darker or lighter spots where it's uneven. Which shouldn't be that hard to achieve if I really crumple up the foil so the shape is smooth and remove it after baking, right?
Foreshadowing.
I'm gonna mix a little bit of green Cernit clay with some translucent Sculpey to get a green translucent clay. I rolled out the clay to be about 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm gonna wrap the clay around the foil, trying to keep it even all around. Use my finger to pinch the clay and make a little tail. Let's not forget to make a hole at the top so I can remove the foil once it's baked. I made the 2 other heads and 2 other bodies in the same way. Poke the holes for the wires, then bake the clay. Once it had cooled down, I started to gently remove the foil. It just took so long. And after an hour of very little progress and a few broken pieces, I ran out of patience. And I tried the LED with one of the head that I managed to empty, and it didn't look that great. I mean, it works, but we can do better. So let's try something else. This time, I'm gonna make a mold. Well, 2 molds. One for the head and one for the body. The idea is to press a thin layer of clay in the mold to make a sort of Pikmin shell, so it's hollow on the inside. First, I need to make a master Pikmin, which I'll use to make the Pikmin mold. I'll keep the antenna and the ghostly tail straight for now, so it's easier to demold the clay. Which is why I can't use the one I just made. I can always bend it in the right shape once it's out of the mold. Sounds like a great plan? I mean, if the foil didn't work, this is gonna work for sure, right?
Foreshadowing.
I went ahead and baked the master Pikmin. Now, let's make those molds. I made a little clay patty with some leftover clay, dusted that with cornstarch so it wouldn't stick to the master. Then smushed the head right in there. And made holes with the back of a paintbrush to make the registration keys. Registration?
Registration.
Registration?
Registration.
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 I made the body mold in the same way, then baked those two pieces. I'll reinsert the master pigment in the mold, dust it with cornstarch, and smush a clay patty on top. I'll repeat the process for the body and bake the second halves of the molds. This was my first time making molds with polymer clay. The body mold came out pretty good. The head mold is a bit wonky, but it's fine, I can work with that. So to make the pigment shells, I'm gonna gently push the clay in the mold to make sure it really gets in there. Then press the molds together. Took it out of the mold and voila! Okay, it looks bad, but I'm gonna trim the excess clay off and smooth out the seam. It's a bit finicky, but I gotta say that worked pretty good. The head was a bit harder to mold since it's bigger, and it took a couple of tries before I got a decent result. I also realized that the clay would stick less to the mold when I use alcohol, so I switched to that. I also gave up on rolling out the clay. It's easier to just smush it in there. I made 3 heads in total, made the holes for the wires, then baked the clay. The bodies came out pretty good. The clay is still patchy like in my previous attempts. You can really see how bad it looks on this head. I tried to sand it and rub the clay with acetone to remove the patches, but it didn't work at all. And it was all for nothing because 2 out of the 3 heads that I made are too thick. And the light barely goes through. You can also see where the seam is, so those pieces are going à la poubelle. Yeah, that sucks. But I can just remake them, but thinner this time, right? Sounds like a great plan, except this is all I have left of the translucent clay. And on that filming day, it was a national holiday, so all the stores were closed. And not only that, I checked online and my local art store didn't have any translucent clay in stock. Since I'm running out of patience, let's do something else until the new clay I ordered gets here. So let's figure out the LED situation. Like I said earlier, my dad is helping me with that part, and we tried to figure out the best way to go about it.
Parce que le fil USB, j'aimerais qu'il passe en arrière comme là.
Connecté qui sorte là.
Ouais, ben c'est ça que j'aimerais là parce que ça sera, le trou est déjà là.
Oui.
It took us a while and my mom even came to see what we were doing.
Je vous entendais parler.
Ça, je vais faire des affaires.
My dad was explaining that ideally the LEDs would have been placed further away from the screens, so the light would be diffused nicely and evenly. But the top screen of the DS is pretty thin, so he wanted to extend it by making a box on the back. But that sounds a bit more complicated than what I had the patience for. So I'm gonna try squeezing the LEDs in the top panel, and if that doesn't work, we'll try my dad's idea.
Ouf, ouais. Barely.
Il squeezerait.
Il squeezerait à peine.
So once we had that figured out, he showed me how to solder the wires on the LEDs.
Commande un fire hazard que ça va être.
0.
0?
Tu vas pas laisser ça mettre la nuit?
Non.
I'm not gonna go over that because I'm obviously not qualified to do so, but I did pass the inspection.
C'est bien ça? Je passe une inspection.
And then soldered the rest of the LEDs for the top screen. Let's check if they light up. Woohoo! Okay, so it's been about a week and I received the clay. I bought some extra, you know, just in case something else goes wrong, but at this point, what else could go wrong, right? Right?
Foreshadowing.
Since the 2 previous tests had problem with patchiness, I bought Cernit translucent clay as well. I made little samples of each clay and one with half Cernit, half Sculpey. Here is what they look like over my phone flashlight. Cernit is more translucent but patchy. Half and half is pretty good, and Sculpey is more opaque but also patchy. So half and half it is. Let's do the molding process real quick. This is gonna go so well, for sure.
Foreshadowing.
So the Cernit clay is a lot more sticky than the Sculpey was. And with the alcohol in the mold, it sorta melts the clay, and that makes it very hard to work with. I made 4 attempts and only one sorta looks decent. They look so wonky. I'm gonna take a break. So it's the next day, and since I can't seem to achieve a decent result with the clay, let's try filling the mold with another material. So I gave hot glue a try. I mean, at this point, what else could go wrong, right?
Foreshadowing.
I didn't think to grease the mold before filling it with glue, and when I tried to take it out, it ripped out chunks of the mold. Okay, this project is cursed. Everything just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Off camera, I tried to remake the busted mold parts, and just to further prove that this project is cursed, I broke the new mold parts. And the master too, because I didn't put enough cornstarch, so everything got stuck together. Yeah, everything is going great. This is fine. I just need a minute. Why do I do this to myself? So I'm gonna try one last thing, and if that doesn't work, I'm just gonna use glow-in-the-dark paint instead of the LEDs. This is my siblings and I leftover school crayon collection. I picked out the green ones, but honestly, the color didn't even matter. So here's plan D? E? Gosh, this is getting out of hands. It's the same plan as plan A, but instead of using foil, I'll use wax. Cold wax is solid, hot wax is liquid. Do you see where I'm going with this? I warmed up the wax, let it cool down until it wasn't too hot to handle, but also still malleable. Then I made teardrop shapes just like I did with the foil. The wax wasn't easy to work with, but I made it work. Propped it up on a toothpick so it's easier to handle. And when it had completely cooled down, I took an X-Acto knife and cleaned up the shape as much as I could. When I was happy with it, I covered it in clay, cleaned up the dust and smoothed it out as much as I could with rubbing alcohol. Then poke holes for the eyes, fill the holes with blue clay. I think it's very cute that the glow pigments have uneven eyes. Let's bake it and hope it works. There's a little ring where the head was sitting in the wax in the oven, but honestly, at this point, it doesn't bother me that much. It also looks good with the light. Here's a comparison between the wax head versus the mold head. It looks so much better. Oh, finally getting somewhere. So off camera, I went ahead and sculpted the 2 other heads. Also made sure there was a hole at the bottom for the hot wax to escape. I have to say the smell of melting crayon isn't great, so I don't really recommend this method. I also made bodies. I only made 2 because I had a spare one with the foil still in it, so I'll cut that one in half to make the pigment that goes through the DS. So I'll bake all those pieces except the one that's already baked and start working on the arms. It's done in the same way I made them in all my other pigment videos. I've struggled a lot less in those videos, so you might enjoy those more. Unless you've enjoyed watching me fail, then I'm glad at least one of us enjoyed it. I'll gently press the arms on the body and position the arms in the way they should be. Then pick the bodies one last time. While they cool down, I'm gonna paint a piece of cardstock yellow and one green to make the flowers and leaves. I'm gonna make them in the same way I did for my Pikmin fall diorama, which is to cut 2 leaf shapes, add some glue around the edges but not in the middle. Let that dry a bit and then add more detail with a colored pencil. And then glue the leaf around the tip of the antenna. I cut the shape for the flower stems out of green paper, rolled it up, glued the flower petals inside, I also made little flower buttons from air dry clay, which you can't see because that's all the footage I have. Sorry about that, sometimes I forget I'm filming. And for the last Pikmin flower, I made the stem and petals, glued them together and rolled it around the antenna. The last detail to add on the Pikmin is the pupils. That I'll draw on with a Posca pen. And that's it for the Pikmins. So let's finish assembling and wiring everything. I added the wire to the LEDs and threaded each one through the body. Then superglued the head on top. So I got my Pikmin in place. We'll connect the wires to the screen LEDs, then connect the top screen LEDs to the bottom screen LEDs, and connect the other 2 Pikmins on there. And about an hour later, I soldered all the wires that needed to be soldered, and now I just gotta close up the DS and superglue the Pikmins in place. And that's it. Let's see the final result. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed watching me successfully fail my way to making this diorama. Overall, I feel like I spent a lot of time and energy on this for not so great results, and that's a little disappointing. Anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.